Tom, I'm so very pleased, first of all, to have met you in the first place, and secondly, to be able to sit up here and ask you some questions. You have lots and lots of great insight. I think that this group's going to learn a lot from. Let's start by learning a little bit about you and your background.
I thought you were going to say how illustrious my background was. You can't leave that to me.
Tom has an exceptionally illustrious background.
Well, maybe the best thing to do is to talk about how I got connected to the data world as a way to talk about my background. I started at NBC in the media industry and was fortunate enough to be the first president of NBC Cable and start CNBC. And in starting CNBC, one of the first decisions we had to make was how do we put data on the screen, largely in the form of a stock ticker, which the advertising world initially totally revolted against. What are you talking about? I will not let my ad be up there if you were going to put a ticker against it. We said, well, that's how you're going to hold the attention of a financial news audience to your ad. If you take the ticker away, they may lose interest. So going back, which is now almost 30 years, to the issue of data in the ad industry, it started on a rocky road, and I'd say that it's still been pretty rocky as it's gone through many different transitions. Use of data there, I remember one of the key discussions I had with Brandon Tartikoff, the late great Brandon Tartikoff, who was head of NBC Entertainment and responsible for NBC's golden years. And he didn't understand why we were willing to support $30 million of losses on CNBC when he thought he could put to get $30 million of program expenditure to much better use, driving much higher audiences. And I remember a conversation where I said to him, Brandon, here's what we want to do. We want to make sure 99.7% of the television audience is never watching us at any given time. And he looked at me and said, what? I said, yeah, 99.7% should hopefully never watch us at any given time, because with a 0.3 rating, we are going to make this more valuable than a broadcast television network. He thought that was the craziest thing in the world, but of course, cable network economics with the dual revenue stream that developed over time more or less borne that out. So that was the early stages of my data career. Moving to TiVo, where I've had a much more direct relationship to the theme of this summit, which is how do you connect television to outcomes, and something we spent a lot of time on. At TiVo, our primary mission was how do you use data to create a much better viewing experience. It started obviously with recorded television, but then it was all about menuing and navigation, and how do you create a much more valuable and personalized viewing experience by being able to cull metadata associated with content into a form that was associated with the personal preferences of a viewer. And how could you do that in a way to make it much more valuable what somebody was getting and being able to access and know was there at any given time. And that was all about the consumer being able to navigate what was becoming through recorded television and VOD and stream. We were the first to put Netflix and Amazon integrated into the television experience. And how do you take infinite choice and make it tameable? But we left out a key variable in the television industry, which was, okay, how about the B2B world? How do you help the advertiser navigate those same set of issues coming at it from their perspective? And what I will call issue one, which we thought lay at the heart of what was going on in television then, and I think it has only gotten to be more so now, is the issue of commercial avoidance. If people weren't watching the commercials, you weren't going to have any impact from the commercials. And you know, it's funny to me that as that issue began to play out and things like C3 were developed to deal with recorded television and delayed viewing. And I can't tell you how many people in the ad industry would come up to me and say, I haven't watched a commercial in 5 years because of TiVo, except the Super Bowl. And then they'd turn around and I'd hear them in public forums talking about how C3 had saved the industry in terms of how recorded television was now being appropriately captured. Exactly. Of course, what we found was that capturing who was watching a program and capturing who was watching the ads in that program were two very different things. And having millions of boxes that we were able to pull second-by-second data from to know exactly in a recorded setting. And remember, the larger the ratings of a television show, the larger the recorded audience of the television show. And so you had many broadcast primetime entertainment shows, as you do today, which were drawing the highest ratings, were also drawing vast amounts of that audience off of delayed viewing, where the television commercials were not being viewed at all. And there was an even greater disconnect between ratings and commercial viewing as a result. And we started saying, God, there's a major issue here of what is actually effective in a commercial. So that led to issue 2, which goes to the heart of outcomes, which is, okay, well, if people are not watching that many commercials, the commercials they are watching, how effective are they? And are there sales that are being derived from them in a way that we can measure? And from there, we got into matching, of course, on an anonymous basis, vast amounts of second-by-second commercial viewing with actual purchase decisions. And with that, began to come up with a way of offering advertisers and brands a way to much more effectively measure both avoidance, commercial viewing, and the sales that flowed from it. That's how I got here. Now you can ask
That's
a
all.
question.
You don't even need me up here. This is great. Well, issue number 3, a multitude of screens, right? I mean, how do you start to then think about this across environments and across screens?
Well, that really did become issue number 3, because as we had some real success with some key brands and advertisers saying, okay, now we can measure that, the questions started coming with, okay, but you're telling us in a household who's watching and what they're buying. I need to know that on an individual level. And I need to know what that individual is also seeing from other screens. And I kind of also want to know what are the social media influences beyond seeing my ad that are contributing to the ultimate decision. And if they aren't actually buying, I want to know where they're going. So I need to have some kind of location data capability beyond simply knowing if the purchase decision happened or not. And I kind of need to know if they're purchasers, non-purchasers, swing purchasers. So you got to cut the data in a way that I have a better sense of exactly what kind of purchaser I'm dealing with. And so this began to become a much bigger issue of
yes,
how do you...
I now have a headache from all of that. It's terrifying.
And, you know, it was not one that TiVo could answer on its own, because we had access to a terrific set of set-top box data. There were many parts of that equation that we didn't have access to. And that kind of led to what I would call the next issue.
Issue number 4, right? Data.
We haven't rehearsed this at all. She
I don't
just
know what he's talking
knows
about.
what my numerical sequence of
see
issues
the inside
are.
of this man's head. Issue number 4 was around sort of fragmentation and complexity and siloing of data. I think as a result of it living in many places or many companies asking to hold it or trying to create new data streams. So, I mean, I will say personally, you know, having spent many years as a research analyst before I came to MediaMath, I certainly see it at MediaMath as well. That's a giant one, right? A giant one is, how do I make sense of the mess of stuff that I have? So talk to me a little bit about that, perspectives on that.
Well, it's a very tough issue, and there are a lot of aspects to it, but the one that I think is contributing to the most complexity in the marketplace is just how many providers of how many different data sets have developed and are offering themselves to be able to help in one particular silo of the overall data integration issue. And there's some great companies, some at startup stage, some at mid stage, some a little more mature than that. But there's so many of them with so many different research techniques on how they extract data. And you know, you could say there are 4 or 5 dozen that are, when you add all those
There's
pieces.
There's probably hundreds,
There are
quite
probably
frankly.
hundreds, but in terms of significant ones that have some degree of traction, then many of whom are probably represented here, it's really hard to put all that together into a cohesive view that really makes the advertiser and brand job of answering the question. I want to know what everybody in that house watched on TV, on each set, on each screen. I want to know how they were otherwise, what commercials they saw, what they didn't see, what the where they went, what they bought, what was the social media influence along the way, and that's a lot of different pieces to put together. And I will say that you know, it's too complex for most advertisers to deal with. You have some P&Gs and players out there who have maybe enough internal capability and wherewithal to really deal with that. But most of it say, geez, there's too much coming at me. I yield to the agency on this. And then, you know, to be frank about it, the agencies are, for the most part, not the people with the greatest incentives in the world to kind of drive a more cohesive, integrated, simple approach to this. One, they kind of thrive on that complexity because it makes it more necessary for advertisers and brands to rely on them. And two, and this is true of television networks also, the more you drive toward targeting or ultimately addressability, the more efficiency and ROI is in the equation, the more you take waste out, the less is spent, most likely. And with less spending, those particular players in the equation have a harder time seeing, particularly with the other pressures on traditional linear television, how they win. And that leads to...
Issue number 5.
Right. Wow. We really have this down.
Okay. Issue number 5, crisis in traditional TV viewing.
And that's what's going on simultaneously here, is we've got all these evolving data sources. We are dealing with a true crisis in traditional linear television viewing. You know, I think the studies I've seen is just over the last 3 years, something like 580 billion impressions have been lost off of traditional linear TV. It's about an 18% audience decline just since 2014. Now, this is nothing new. I mean, having come from a broadcast network, I was chief strategist of NBC, and you know, if you look from 1990 on, audience decline on a compounded basis has been about 3% a year for the last 25 years. What's interesting, though, is while many predicted that that was going to break the back of broadcast networks as that viewing decline occurred, what actually happened was you saw CPM growth that was close to 5% compounded on an annual basis over that time. Audience was shrinking, but because of scale of delivery, the back never got broken. And the notion of a unique delivery of audience, where people still weren't that concerned about waste versus efficiency, continued to, the broadcast networks continue to thrive. The question is now, are we facing something really different this time? And I think we are. And I think we're facing something different for a couple reasons. One, the pace of decline is accelerating because of new sources, largely non-commercial sources, Netflix, Amazon, et cetera. You are seeing mid to high single-digit year-over-year declines now, both on cable networks and broadcast networks, and that looks like it's not slowing.
Right.
With skinny bundles and other things going on, it looks like it will probably accelerate. And then two, you have really meaningful substitutable alternatives developing that are developing really quickly. I think I saw last week that YouTube hit the 1 billion hours of television. What was that measure? I think it was 1 billion. 1 billion, is it a day? Is that possible? I think it was 1 billion a day.
That sounds right. I mean, it's terrifying,
hours
but
of television. And it is just about to hit a level that exceeds all global traditional linear television viewing.
Right.
And that's one bucket of alternative substitutable impressions that can develop that is going to force a very different answer here. And so, when you put that audience decline issue against this, you start asking the question of, is it different this time in terms of what could happen to pricing in the traditional television world unless something else happens?
So, right. I'm not going to call it issue number 6. I'm going to say what's the answer that you are contemplating here. And then I think we have to stop, unfortunately. This is not an issue.
It reminds me of the story of the really wealthy husband with a young wife, and
oh boy,
he says to her, "Honey, if I lost all my money, would you still love me?"
Okay.
And she says to him, "Of course, honey, I would still love you, but I would miss you very dearly." And what is going on here is there doesn't seem to be any end to giving people cheaper packages on some kind of commercial-free basis or lower load commercial basis, and they will flee to find them. They love their shows still, but they will flee to find them elsewhere, and or on some other basis. And I think the answer here is pretty clear. If we aren't going to break the back of traditional advertising in a linear delivered world, I put VOD in this category as well, we're going to have to find targeting with efficiency and addressability as answers to how a more valuable audience can be delivered at hopefully some degree of premium pricing. Now, I would argue to some extent the better targeting gets, the less need there is for addressability. Television is in still relatively infant stage on all this stuff. I mean, I think, 48% of the country has truly some degree of addressability in terms of advertising insertion, and it's probably 1% of the inventory in that 48 million, roughly half of television homes. And programmatic when it comes to traditional television, something the digital world is much more advanced on, is still largely the domain of remnant advertising, for which there is not great data for the most part. Some will take issue with that, but from a macro perspective, I think that's a fair assessment. And when you look at that, you say, look, these things have to change. I think probably our best bet toward driving better pricing to avoid the breaking of the back of linear advertising television rates, given the confluence of all those issues, is personalized, creative, that has the ability to be inserted on an addressable basis, where you are not only hitting the right target, but you're hitting the right target with the right message, and have the ability to measure with that some specific outcome that gives a clear answer as to the value of what you've been doing to be able to continue or reorient your marketing target. I really don't see any other answer, given these confluence of trends, to how pricing is going to be preserved in this portion of the television world?
Probably better served answering that question than anyone in this room, so I suggest we all listen when he says things like that. The end. I think we're out of time. We didn't even get to live television, which is the...
And I'm still waiting for that illustrious introduction.
I'm never going to live it down.